I like that it tells you that now.
Mhm.
Kind of nice. Okay, welcome everybody. How is everyone this evening? Good? Well, some of what I'll tell you this evening you may know about, some of it you may not, and parts of it will be completely new because it has to do with the Commission on the Status of Women, which 65, which occurred the last 2 weeks in March of this year. So I don't. I was not familiar with the League of Women Voters role with the United Nations until oh 2 years ago, 3 years ago, when Jackie Lightcap went to the United Nations, and then she came and did a hot topic for our league then. And some of you may have been at that one. So to start with, I'm just going to share a 3-minute little video. I've got several video clips for you guys today. And this will kind of give a brief overview. So let me share the screen. And go to... Okay. Well, if I unmute it, that'll help.
But while they have an impact, women and girls are leaders, change makers, caretakers, and peacekeepers. But while they have an empowered role in our societies, to this day, women and girls are still forced to fight for their rights. How much progress have we achieved, and how much work remains? How can you carry on the fight for equal rights? Women's struggle for equal rights is centuries old. But 1848 marked a watershed moment for women's rights with the Seneca Falls Convention, where women activists publicly petitioned for their civil, social, political, and religious rights. In 1893, New Zealand sent a message to other activists across the world that equal voting rights were achievable through advocacy. Entering the 20th century, women around the world are mobilizing in ever greater numbers to campaign for gender equality, just as women's role in the labor force is rapidly evolving by opening up options beyond caretaking roles. In 1945, the United Nations is formed in response to the destructive toll of 2 world wars, and Eleanor Roosevelt oversees the drafting of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. For all the world to hear, she and other advocates underline the place of women's rights within. This sets a foundation for women's rights norms and standards at the international level. In the subsequent decades, just as women are taking historic leadership positions in government, women activists at the grassroots level dovetail with the worldwide momentum by becoming powerful symbols of feminist resistance and social change. This momentum reaches a climax in 1995 when the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action presents a visionary global agenda for women and girls' rights. But in spite of all the progress, as we enter the 21st century, patriarchal stigmas persist and exemplary leaders arise to resist them. With the rise of the digital age, social media emerges as a crucial tool to galvanize populations in the fight against injustice. A single woman's voice is now louder than ever. Grassroots activists trigger social movements online and offline, from cities to villages, inspiring future generations of women and girl leaders. After relentless campaigning, these movements generate changes in policy that signal a true shift in international attitudes and practice towards equal rights. Where are we now? A quarter century after the Beijing Declaration, women and men must mobilize together to overcome the remaining obstacles to gender equality. They must fight for an end to gender-based violence, for access to healthcare, for equal pay, and for equal participation in political life. The ink isn't dry. Be a part of Generation Equality and let us continue to write history together.
Did y'all have any questions from that little clip? Since it's a pretty small group of us, I want to keep it fairly interactive. I mean, I have a presentation to go through here, but I'd like, if you have questions, just, I have my volume all the way up. Can you guys hear me okay?
It's a little more quiet than it was before for some reason.
Is that better? I can speak up. Use my projection voice, right? And Charlie joined us in the midst of that too. So anyway, the United Nations was formed in 1945, and Eleanor Roosevelt was, we're gonna listen to another quick little clip, but Eleanor Roosevelt was instrumental in the League being involved with helping promote the United Nations. So on to, and learning a little bit more about her role in the League and the United Nations kind of helped put the pieces together for me. This video is 10 years old, 11 years old, but
there will come a time, I think, when all people will recognize that the contribution of men and women to life is different, but equally important.
Eleanor Roosevelt was not a suffragist. And so her emergence into women's politics really came through the issues of the living wage, immigration, housing, education, sanitation. And this was what the League adopted as its own agenda. And so it was natural for Eleanor, once women got the vote, to throw her energies into the League's efforts. In the 1920s, she served as its vice president for legislative affairs. She monitored federal legislation and hearings in Congress and in the New York State legislature. What she learned from the League, certainly it exposed her to a wide variety of opinions and passions that she learned to marshal and to mobilize.
I can remember the day when the only place of leadership that was considered possible for any young woman was her own home. But she has found that in order to be the real leader at home, she must take up the full responsibilities of her citizenship.
She writes My Day column after My Day column, extolling the League of Women Voters' training mechanisms, their preparation for lobbying, their ability to keep people at the table. Eleanor writes, I've always found that the best workers in a political party frequently are graduates of the League of Women Voters. Members learn how to find out what they really want to know on a wide variety of subjects. The League of Women Voters trains good citizens who have a sense of responsibility about what goes on in their locality, in their state, and in their nation. When she leaves the White House and becomes a member of the first American delegation to the United Nations, then she really ratchets up her involvement with the League to help the League disseminate correct information to combat propaganda about the UN. So the League, to Eleanor, is a player and a partner in this campaign to promote the four freedoms at home and around the world. Eleanor believes that women must be at the table. what the League today does, I think, is that it prepares women to feel comfortable so they can join and enjoy political participation with both men and women.
So that last little bit of the clip is definitely dated. But I think the rest of it really gives some good insight as to how the League and the United Nations really
52 guidance counselors, mental health professionals, and social workers.
And then we have Dr. Lewis wanting to chime in on YouTube. Anyway, so in 1946, the United Nations established the Commission on the Status of Women. And over the years, there were 3 world conferences on the status of women, and numerous other commissions that convened. In 1995, Beijing held the 4th World Conference on the Status of Women. And the League of Women Voters played a key role, sponsoring several workshops, including grassroots organizing and lobbying. So I think that's pretty phenomenal. And the League continues to play a pretty key role in not only the Commission on the Status of Women, but the United Nations as a whole. In 1997, the League of Women Voters was granted special consultative status in the Economic and Social Council of the United Nations, which means that we are allowed to intervene on behalf of positions that the League holds. And so we joined other NGOs in submitting an official statement on the behalf of the girl child that was presented at the UN Commission on the Status of Women in March of 2000. And as a result of the interventions, the League successfully launched and supported the Working Group on Girls. You may have heard of that. And a coalition of 80+ NGOs dedicated to focusing governments on the plight of girls throughout the world. The International Day of the Girl is also celebrated around the world as a result of the League and the Working Group on Girls efforts. So I think that's pretty amazing. Another piece of information I think that is pretty profound is that women in Saudi Arabia now enjoy the right to vote after the League provided an intervention that linked women's enfranchisement and civic engagement to the GDP. So our impact is felt worldwide. I think key in that little piece of information is linking the empowerment of women to a more robust economy. And that's how we're going to get buy-in throughout the world. So since then, the League, in coordination with the Working Group on Girls, has also developed a comprehensive strategy to prevent human sex trafficking at major world events, like the World Cup soccer and that kind of thing, the Super Bowl, those kinds of events. It was adopted in Brazil and implemented first in 2014 at the World Cup and then at Mardi Gras. And the United States has included components of this strategy in the 2014 Trafficking in Persons Report. And in 2014, the League also officially adopted a statement against human sex trafficking. So that continues to be one of our focuses at the United Nations as well. So the 2021 Beijing, 2021 was Beijing plus 25. So they were looking at, because last year it was held virtually for one day, the Commission on the Status of Women in 2020 was supposed to be another 2-week in-person event, and it didn't happen. It was the first big in-person event held, supposed to be held at the United Nations, that wasn't because of the pandemic. There, I switched you guys to it so I can see you all better now. So, so the priority theme for the CSW for this year, CSW 65, was women's full and effective participation in decision-making in public life, as well as the elimination of violence for achieving gender equality and the empowerment of all women and girls. The review theme, which is really a focus as well, was women's empowerment and the link to sustainable development. So in 2015, the United Nations adopted 17 sustainable development goals, and the 5th of those is gender equality. So that is the piece of the Sustainable Development Goals, just one piece of it, that is our focus in the Commission on the Status of Women. As we all know, the COVID-19 pandemic has really dramatically set back a lot of advancements that were made toward equality, which is very, very difficult to quantify, but they're looking at that. And that was one of the things that was discussed during the CSW 65 as well. And where do we go from there? So let me play another little clip here for you. Yeah, here we go. All right. Anybody have any questions so far? Okay. So
Inequality for women.
First, this is part of a 35-minute video that the United Nations produced.
The world's great injustices, and it is an injustice that must be and will be swept away. 75% of parliamentarians are men. 73% of managerial decision makers are men. 67% of climate negotiators are men. And 87% of the people at the peace table are men. Even though we know that when peace settlements include women, the negotiations and outcomes are more durable. Globally, almost 1 in 5 women has experienced violence in the past 12 months at the hands of a man they know. Women and girls do 3 times as much unpaid care and domestic work as men. The global gender pay gap is stuck at 16%. Every year, 12 million girls are married before 18. All of this has to change. It's time to stop trying to change and start changing the systems that prevent them from achieving their potential. And this is the battle that women in this century will not lose. They are too strong, and their voices will not be silenced.
So that's a little overview of some of the statistics that we're facing. And those have been just compounded by the pandemic. One of the most impressive and impactful sessions, I attended 9 sessions over the 2 weeks, anywhere from, I think the shortest one was an hour, to 2-3 hours, I think was the longest one, during that 2-week time frame. And they had official sessions that were through the Commission on the Status of Women, and then they had side events that were through the non-governmental organizations, the NGOs. And there were a lot of those that were really interesting. The League of Women Voters US was one of the co-sponsors of what I found one of the most interesting. And it was called We Have Your Back, Breaking the Cycle from Online Harassment to Threats to Violence Against Women and Girl Leaders. So it was, it's interesting because looking back over my notes about it, the panelists were President of the Norwegian Parliament, an advocate and writer on women's leadership and gender disinformation, Chris Sagona, who is one of our UN observers. She's an American journalist and one of our full-time observers there. Julie Inman Grant, Australian e-safety commissioner. Who knew that they even had an e-safety commissioner? That may be something we need to look at, right? And then one of the ambassadors to the UN from Albania, a member of the Canadian Parliament, and then a Kenyan senator and president of the Inter-Parliamentarian Union, Bureau of Women Parliamentarians. That's a mouthful. So it was fascinating to me that all of those people came together, you know, and that's just an example of the different, when I say that there are NGOs that sponsored it, it was like that. Lots of organizations, lots of people. There were a few of them that were sponsored just by like one of them was from Australia. One of them, a statistic from this one that I was going to quote for you guys. 85% of women worldwide have been subject to some form of online harassment. It's worse for younger women and worse for women in the Southern Hemisphere. And then when I quoted this statistic just in a couple of days after I heard it to women that I encountered here in Lawrence, it was 100% of the women that I talked with, yeah. And, you know, I think it's just become, I know in just my dealings with online social media and that kind of thing, it's become those things that we just look at and brush off and delete, right? But it happens all the time. And it can certainly become violent and physical, not just digital, particularly for women that are more in the public spotlight. So, Chris, one of the quotes that Chris said, we need to counter disinformation and speak solutions to media, engage boys and men, and help define, understand, and combat misogyny because we're swimming in it. And I think that's something to ponder and really absorb. What our UN observers would like for us to do is think globally and act locally. So taking all of these things that I'm sharing with you and that I learned, and then applying them at our local level. So let me play a little bit more of the video. And
I was named after a girl, an Afghani folk hero who was killed in a battle. Just after I was born, my father got our family tree. It went back 300 years, but not a single girl or woman's name appeared on it. He decided to make me the first. He wrote Malala. That's me.
When her father's school was closed down by the Taliban, Malala Yousafzai began to campaign for the right of young girls across the country to go to school.
I have rights. I have the right of education. I have the right to play. I have the right to sing. I have the right to talk. I have the right to go to market. I have the right to speak up.
They shot her in the head. She is still in critical condition.
She was airlifted to a military hospital in Peshawar, where she had surgery as surgeons battled to save her life. Vigils took place throughout the world.
This first photo released today, Malala's eyes are open and she...
We have some really good news to report tonight. Malala Yousafzai walked out of a London hospital today.
Today, it is an honor for me to be speaking again after a long time. They thought that the bullet would silence us, but they failed. My message right now is to young people. We are living in a world where things are not the way we want. We are getting a system, we're getting a world which is unequal, which is sexist, which is racist. We have systems that are discriminating against people. Our climate or environment is at risk, and there's so much that needs to be done. But I hope that young people, they stand up, they raise their voices, they start their activism right now. Let your age not stop you. Oftentimes we're told that, you have to be 40 and 50 to change the world. I do not believe in that. I think you can be a change maker right now. If you are 11, if you are 16, if you are, 30, 40, change is possible anytime. And I want you to believe in yourself and make this world a fairer, more equal, and a better place for each and every one.
And once again, there are positive solutions that can turn things around fast. We need more women in positions of power at every level of government. The time has come for quotas that make sure women are equally represented in every country. It's time to make our laws equal so that every woman is entitled to a job and a national identification card and to own property. Women must be able to live free from violence and have the right to make decisions over their bodies and lives, especially in choosing if and when they marry. We must guarantee full access to sexual and reproductive health services and rights. We must provide the money to close the gap in girls' education. And there are important changes needed to achieve economic empowerment for women, from equal access to finance, to ending the gender pay gap, to equal access to the digital world, from mobile bank accounts to digital payment systems and digital education. It just doesn't make sense. Women are half of the population, but society does not treat them as equals. This is a legacy that needs to change here and now. By changing our behaviors, but also by changing laws and common practices across the world, we must all make that happen now.
Everyone can do their part to make it happen. We can create and enjoy green jobs, live healthier lives with cleaner air and better diets. And in more equal societies, all of us, men and women, can enjoy safer and more productive lives. There is power in every decision we make. We can shape society and the future of our planet and people in every choice we make.
My final message is, let's be humble. Let's recognize our fragilities, and let's understand that only in unity and solidarity we will be able to address them. It's true in each one of our countries, it's true at global level. And let's take profit of the 75th anniversary of the United Nations to think together how better we can organize the international community to address climate change, inequality, pandemics like the COVID-19, and so many other aspects that can only be solved if we join together and if we are able to have one common strategy, one common project, and one common determination in favor of peace, of development, and human rights in the world.
Anyway, that kind of sums it all up. Forrest Whitaker's talked briefly about some of the other sustainable development goals that the UN had set, but it all kind of ties together. And I played the Malala clip partly because I'm sure that you all have all heard of her and probably know her story. But my husband spent a year in Afghanistan as a military member. And just having his, just what I've learned from him, and then also what I've read on my own, most recently reading a journalist that had been talking with a member of the Taliban. His quote that he brought away from there was, well, his bit of information was, why is it okay for you to participate in the Taliban? And the guy said, well, everybody that's out here, their mothers know what they're doing. And they don't do anything without their mothers knowing what they're doing. And he's like, well, how can this be okay? You know, how can the participation in the Taliban be okay with your mom? And he said, well, she doesn't know any better because they don't let the women be educated. And that piece of information also helps you just kind of put it all together. And I think that happens globally. You know, it's not just Afghanistan that happens. But I think women still in Afghanistan have a lot of power. And the educated women are the ones that are trying to make the changes and trying to bring back more of a democratic society over there. One of the sessions that I participated in was about education, and it had a woman who was in Afghanistan and ran a girls' school. And her insight was fascinating. And just listening to her, she was brilliant and progressive. And she had these girls who would come in from the countryside every day, and she would educate them how to read and write and think and speak up for themselves. And I think that is something that we can just take to heart here, in that what we do in educating voters is essential. You know, educating not just here in Lawrence, Douglas County, but in everybody that we talk with, you know, in the way that we present ourselves. What was I going to tell you about the education piece of it? Oh, yes. One of the other sessions that I found really interesting was, it was a working group in Africa, and they had brought together initially a group of 30 women from very rural, very remote areas. They brought them in and educated them about how to advocate for themselves and how to make business deals. And that worked out really well. And then they brought in 240 total, and taught them how to negotiate, like if they had a jewelry business, or if they had farming, if they had some sort of, caretaking business, that kind of thing, how to deal with currency and how to deal with international dealings back across borders. And the empowerment that the women felt was tremendous. And I can't remember the exact, I don't have it in front of me, unfortunately, but the percentage of economic growth that occurred in that region was astounding. It was, 30-something% over less than 2 years. And that's the impact that empowering women can have. So, did you all have any questions? Jen, you're muted. There you go.
Several years ago, I happened to be in France and read the international newspaper, and all of the women in Switzerland had gone on strike for equal pay. And I noticed in one of the videos that Finland did the same thing. I'm curious to know what impact any of that has. I mean, equal pay is something I know that I've care a lot about in this country. And of course, it happens all over the globe. And I'm just wondering if you happen to know, or if there's places to go to find out if that's how well that strategy works or doesn't work. You know, because I was trying to imagine the United States of all women, you know, boycotting, not working for a day, and what impact. I mean, everything would shut down, you know, the secretaries, for God's sakes. I mean, you know, they know how to run the business. So I'm just wondering, you know, again, about that equal pay puzzle.
So this in reading and learning through all of this, one of the interesting things, when the US really started measuring the economy after World War II, when things were in such, you know, such flux and in such a state of disaster, it was a conscious decision not to include unpaid work that's done by women in figuring out the GDP, because it would be really just too messy, you know, because that's just too hard to quantify. Never mind the fact that so much other of what they do measure is also messy and hard to quantify, right? But it was a conscious decision not to. And as a result, it's been a conscious choice across the globe not to quantify or qualify all of the unpaid work done by women across the globe. And women do 75% of the unpaid work in the world, including the ones that work full-time outside the home or at home, as it may be with the pandemic. So this book, Invisible Women, I think I've referenced it before, but it also tells the story, Jens, of in Iceland. And I think it was Iceland where they first did the strike day, and 90% of the women in the country went on strike. We would never get that in the United States, but 90% of the women, small country. It made a big impact. And I don't know if they immediately felt a change in their pay equity, but I know that it's better than the United States. I want to say it's around 9%. Don't quote me on that, but I think Iceland is around 9% right now. So would it make a difference if we did it here? Possibly. It would just be so hard to get buy-in like that to really make it felt, I think. Anybody else have questions?
Do you remember what year Iceland had their walkout or their strike?
What? Hang
Roughly?
on.
Roughly?
I want to say it was like 1993. I'm not sure. It may have been before that.
92 is when Switzerland went on strike.
Okay, so it must have been before that, I think.
I lived in Iceland for a couple of years, and so
yeah,
I could, I was curious about when that happened.
Well, again, part of it, you know, smaller countries, it would be more feasible, right? I mean, but a country the size of us is, you know, even if one state went on strike, that would be remarkable.
I was way off, Seal. 1975.
Okay.
1975. Yeah, and it was known as the Long Friday.
Okay, that was just 3 years after we were there.
Friday, yeah.
You know, part of why I raised that is one of the suffrage plays out of the UK was exactly that point. That's how they got the man to let the women vote, is because all the women in the man's life went on strike for the day. So his wife was on strike, and the maid went on strike. Nobody was cleaning the house, cooking the meals. Nobody was taking care of the kids. The older daughter was gone. She also had a job and she was on strike. I mean, you know, so I'm just fascinated by that strategy of going on strike.
Mm-hmm. It is an interesting strategy for certain. I think that I think it would just be so hard because so many women in our country work 2+ jobs just to try to make ends meet and are single parents. And there's no way that you could say, go on strike. And they'd be like, all right, I'll go down there and rally instead, at the risk of losing their jobs. And yeah. Yes. So it was really a fascinating couple of weeks to participate, and I'd love to do it again. I'd love to be able to do it in person. Oh, James just entered. Hi, James. In talking with some of our UN observers, because a lot of these things that you see in the video, they're like kind of a pie in the sky sort of, oh, wouldn't that be great Sunday? And she said it's phenomenal to look back and actually see the progress that we've made in just 2 or 3 years. So that's encouraging, that yes, in fact, we do set these lofty goals, but governments do commit to moving on them. And I think that we're back to where we can say that the United States is committed to moving forward on a lot of these things as well, which is encouraging. So,
are you speaking to our current federal administration instead of our last federal administration?
Correct. Yeah.
Okay. Any thoughts about Kansas in particular?
What?
Any thoughts about how we progress in Kansas specifically?
Oh, my goodness. Yeah, that education piece of it. That's, I think that that's the only way that we're going to move forward, and reaching out to the western part of the state and really getting young people involved. This was another interesting thing. The United Nations defines young as 30 and younger.
Okay.
Which I think is a great definition. Did you just miss that, Emily?
Still not young.
I know, but I think that that is really a fascinating take on it, because in the United States, 18 or under, kind of 21 or under, but 30 and under is how they define it. And they not only want to see more women represented in parliaments and decision-making places, but they really are promoting youth being more involved and speaking out a lot more as well, which I think is essential. I'm thrilled that we have more young people participating in the league too. Any other thoughts or questions or whatnot?
Speaking of the youth in the league, I really haven't been involved in that at all, and I know you have mentored them and helped them along. And do they have any plans for summer, or like the August primary?
I need to get back in touch with them, because I haven't talked to them since early May, actually. I need to get back in touch and see what their thoughts are on the August primary. And we did talk about, of course, August 2022 and how essential that's going to be.
Mm-hmm.
But we haven't really talked too much about August of this year.
Yeah, it could be we won't even have a primary. I don't know yet. I mean, I haven't seen the numbers.
Yeah. You think what, Emily?
I think there will be, as there are only 3, well, at least in Lawrence, there are only 3 openings on city commission. And last I checked, there were 7 candidates.
Oh,
really?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
2 of whom are league members, by the way.
Yes, which is great. Yeah. And for those of you that came in a little bit late, I played a clip about Eleanor Roosevelt and the league involvement that she had, and then how she kind of paired us with the UN, and that's why we're still involved. But I think it's interesting that she was not a suffragist, but then she became such a champion for women's rights and human rights in her role. And you said you were reading her biography, Jen? Oh, she went to get it. Yeah. So back to this book, since we're talking books again, if you haven't read it, read it. It's surprising. It's a bunch of data stuff, but it's surprisingly readable and actually pretty funny in parts. Invisible Women. Invisible Women, Data Bias in a World Designed for Men. Yeah. And
who's the author?
The author is Carolyn Criado Perez. Let me look it up here real quick, and I can send you the Amazon link. One of the
library currently has it available too, just to put a plug in for that.
Excellent. One of the stories that they told in one of the sessions was about the Swedish snow clearing. And Sweden had instituted a law that everything they did in every part of public life had to be done through not just a DEI lens, but also in trying to get women more equitable in society. And someone made the remark, because they had come to the snow clearing section of it, and someone was like, surely snow clearing can't have to be changed. And in fact, when they looked at it, you know, all of the snow clearing is done, of course, the main emergency routes first, but then just regular roads, and then, you know, on down until it's finally the pedestrian walkways. And oh, there it is. The pedestrian walkways and byways and that kind of thing. When you look at it, it's actually women that use those routes more in dropping off kids to school, in going to the grocery store, and taking care of family members, you know, all of those kinds of things. And then if you dig a little bit deeper, you realize, oh my gosh, well, there's an increase in healthcare costs around these weather events because there's more injuries and there's more people hospitalized. Well, who are these people? They're the women that are experiencing all of the injuries, and more traumatic injuries because they're more susceptible to them. So when they then made the change and did the pedestrian walkways right in tandem with the emergency routes, work productivity went up, hospitalizations went down. The economic impact of the changes was felt right away. So, and it was just something as simple as that, just changing the order of snow clearing. So it's a fascinating book to read because it's all kinds of stuff like that you sit back and you're like, well, that's just, yeah, it's so baked into our thought processes and our systems that we don't even think twice about it. So it's an interesting look. There's the link to the Amazon Invisible Women. I just put it in the chat. So tell us about Eleanor a little bit, Jens.
Well, I went to my first Rhodes Scholar online, and it was Women in Democracy, and covered lots of wonderful women. And this man, docent from the Hyde Park Roosevelt Library, spoke about Eleanor and, you know, just raved about her. And he just gave a fabulous presentation. Basically, his summary was that she was betrayed her entire life. And he went through and how she was betrayed by her mother. She was betrayed by her grandfather. Of course, she was betrayed by her father, her alcoholic father, betrayed by Franklin, of course, et cetera, et cetera. And so as a result of that, his argument was that she needed to focus on other people. She needed to focus on serving other people. And I'm not to the 1940s yet, but you know, after Franklin's death, I'm still in the 30s. A lot of people felt that she influenced Franklin, and she says flat out in her autobiography that she did not. That she, I think if he asked her opinion, she would give it, but because he wanted lots of opinions, and she talks instead about his actual, you know, male advisors and how they gave him balanced, you know, views and so forth. So I haven't gotten to the suffrage part yet, you know. I mean, I think at some point she says, I'm not a feminist, because she was, you know, born, bred and raised in a very traditional way, in a very traditional woman's household, right? Her mother-in-law chose the home for she and Franklin and lived next door. I mean, it's just, you know, she was maybe that's why she wasn't feminist, because she knew a lot of women who were bossy, you know, who victimized her in a sense, you know what I mean? Who lorded over her. And so in her book, in her autobiography, she talks about, you know, gradually feeling independent, that, you know, at different turning points in her life where she began to take on more independence and feel like her own person. And it really took a lifetime, you know, I mean, way past her youthhood, young adulthood. And of course, Franklin was so huge. And so I'm still, you know, kind of teasing it apart. But in this man, I forgot his name, he said that there's more books coming out on Eleanor, because to this point, most of the historical work focuses on FDR, and that she is given such short shrift on her, you know, on what she actually did, not only during his time in office, but of course after, you know, as you mentioned, with the whole UN Commission on Women, et cetera. I mean, just so many things. So I thought I'd start with her words, you know, her attitudes, and then maybe look at a biography later.
Yeah.
But he said there's new biographies coming out on her, you know, that give her more, you know.
Yeah, because her impact is profound, I think.
Right. Yeah, but it really happened after Franklin more. So
interesting.
Yeah.
Thank you. Anybody else have any thoughts or questions or whatnot? Well, thank you guys for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kristin. This is really helpful and illuminating. And
well, good. I hope it kind of fills in some of the gaps. Because even after Jackie spoke, I'm like, I still don't understand. You know, it's very interesting, but there's so much to it. It's really very broad reaching. So yeah, I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah,
So,
thank you so much. This was great.
Thank you guys.
Thanks, Kristin.
Denise, do you want to put a plug in for our next?
Oh, sure. So thank you for doing our bonus hot topic this month. We appreciate it very much. Next June 15th. This is not our usual Thursday, but it is Tuesday, June 15th at noon to 1 via Zoom. Matt Cravens, data analyst for Douglas County, is going to present his research. So he did his doctorate on voter habits. And so he has gone on and done more research in this field, and it should be a really fascinating topic. And I think would be really, and I'm sorry, Melissa didn't get to hear this. This was one that she was really wanting to hear. And, but it'll be really good information that I think might actually be helpful to us for how we focus our outreach to voters. So So that's June 15th via Zoom.
I'm going to just stop the recording here.